Soft plastic worms. They come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, and no matter your age or fishing experience, they are bass catchers at every pond or lake on the planet. So in today's video, I'm gonna teach you the basics of how to rig a soft plastic worm, choosing the best places to fish with each type, and showing you how to find quick success when fishing with soft plastic worms. My name's Tyler, and let's talk about it. Another giant, another giant. Look at that, y'all. I can't believe what I just caught. Yes! Well, what's going on, folks? Welcome back to Tyler's Reel Fishing. My goal here on this channel is not only to give you guys fun fishing content, but also to teach you how to become better anglers, whether it's catching your first fish or your 1,000th. And because the soft plastic worm category is one that I think all of us need to fully understand, in the effort of time, we're gonna jump straight into the content with kind of some like hypothetical questions about the soft plastic worm before we talk about my 4 favorite worms and how to rig them, and of course, how to go on the water and catch fish. So let's begin. First question, why do bass even eat a soft plastic worm? And the answer, I have no idea. Is it because they think it's an actual worm, or is it just appealing looking in the water? I really don't know, but you know what? In fishing, I feel like anglers tend to overcomplicate things sometimes, and a soft plastic worm is a lure that, if rigged right and thrown in the right locations and retrieved correctly, will catch bass for you all 12 months of the year, unless you have ice on your lake, I guess. Either way, soft plastic worms are super versatile, and even though there's tons of options on Tackle Warehouse of colors and shapes and sizes, really they all can work for you on your pond. Moving on, where do bass eat soft plastic worms? And the answer, 99.9% of the time, is going to be on the bottom. Not in the middle of the column, not on the top, on the bottom. We'll talk more on this later with each type of soft plastic worm rigging we're gonna discuss, but really for the vast majority of them, you want your worm to fall all the way to the bottom of whatever you're fishing, pond, river, or lake. Next, what rod, reel, and line do you need to actually catch fish on a soft plastic worm? And the answer, whatever you've got. I caught a bass one time on a kid's Snoopy pole from 1996. Now, I mean, that sucker's like 2 foot long.
Hey, hold that up.
On the Snoopy.
On the Snoopy.
You truly just need a rod, reel, and line combo that you feel comfortable enough making good long casts with and being able to set the hook firmly with, even at long distances. So if that for you is a 6-foot rod because you're extra strong and you got long arms, fantastic. But for most of us, I would say a 7-foot medium or medium heavy bait caster or spinning rod is gonna be the best for fishing soft plastic worms. I'm gonna have some of my favorite rod, reel, and line combos linked down in the video description if you wanna check them out. And finally, what size worm and size hook to go with it is good for bass fishing wherever you live? And the answer, again, basically every size worm, from 1-inch worms all the way to the huge 14+ inch worms. But if you're just starting out fishing a soft plastic worm, I would recommend going with one anywhere from 4 to 8 inches long. And for the style, some kind of curly tail or straight tail is gonna work just fine. The next thing to worry about when rigging is the hook size. As you see here, I have a wide gap hook. That's the one that I would recommend. We're gonna discuss hooks more in the actual 4 different riggings. But again, for the most part, if you wanna just watch this and cut the video off, I would say a 2/0 wide gap hook is good for your smaller worms, so your 3 to 5 inch worms. Anywhere from 6 to 8 inches, either a 3/0 or a 4/0 hook, and anything above an 8-inch worm is probably a 5/0 wide gap. So now that y'all know some of the basic facts of fishing with a soft plastic worm, I want to dive deep into the 4 main rigging styles that I've used over my last 15 years to catch bass all around the world on a soft plastic worm. And then after we get out of the studio, we're going to go back on the water to discuss the retrieval, the casting, and of course, the hook set to catch fish on each style of worm. All right, so the 4 plastic worm riggings I'm gonna teach you in this video are going to be the standard Texas rig, the Carolina rig, the drop shot, and then the Wacky rig / Neko rig. I have those kind of in the same category because they look and feel kind of the same. And I believe these 4 have an application and a use case for you no matter where you bass fish in ponds or lakes. So let's start with number 1, most applicable I think for all anglers, and that is the standard Texas rig. And other than just the worm, for all these riggings, you will need some kind of a hook. And for a Texas rig, the 2 most common varieties are an extra wide gap worm hook and an offset wide gap worm hook. And to me, it really is just personal preference as to which worm hook you like. I think though, if you're gonna throw a really big soft plastic worm that has a big body to it, you're gonna wanna go with the extra wide gap. But again, for most soft plastic worms, it's totally personal preference, offset or extra wide. And technically, any one of the soft plastic worms I have here on my desk or you have at home can be Texas rigged. But for today's demonstration, I'm gonna go with a standard curly tail worm, this being the Mach Mega. And what you're gonna wanna do to rig a Texas rig is first take your line and thread on a bullet weight, a worm weight. and it goes again with the line going into the skinny, the cone section of the weight. You can put on a bobber stopper or what's called a peg in front of the weight to keep it down on top of your worm, but again, that is not necessary to make a Texas rig. Then you're gonna tie on your standard soft plastic worm hook. I use a Palomar knot for my knot, and then thread on your soft plastic worm, and that's where it gets potentially a little bit tricky. So what you're gonna do is you're going to thread on the hook about 1/3 of an inch through the head of the soft plastic, then poke it out. You're gonna pull the hook all the way through until the eye and your knot is inside the worm. Then you're gonna lay the worm next to the hook, and wherever the last bend before the point is, you're gonna run the point through that section of the worm that lines up. And then you're either gonna run the point all the way up the middle of the worm if you're fishing around a lot of snags and grasses and sticks, but if it's kind of relatively open water, a standard, neighborhood pond, I actually poke the hook all the way through the worm, and then I will find a point to run it back in to just create a little bit of weedlessness. So that right there is a simple Texas rig setup. Again, it catches fish everywhere. Now let's head on the water to complete our knowledge of the Texas rig by talking about the retrieval and the hook set. So let's begin with the traditional weedless Texas rig. Now, like I said, many worms of many sizes, shapes, and colors, of course, can be rigged in a Texas style, but the main purpose remains the same, and that is to catch fish in a weedless way. Again, this thing is a weedless rigging around underwater cover and structure. This, where I'm fishing today, and majority of the time on a big worm, being around aquatic vegetation. We've got coontail, milfoil, all kinds of stuff today. That's the main purpose of a weedless Texas rig. Just because I'm teaching this from the deck of a nice bass boat doesn't mean these tips don't apply when you're on the bank or in a kayak. Matter of fact, most of the B-roll catches you're gonna see of actually showing you guys how to catch fish on these are going to be not in the bass boat. But the number one thing that applies no matter where you fish with a Texas rig, and really with all these worms, is you wanna cast it out there with the Texas rig specifically around your underwater structure where other riggings, like we're gonna talk about, might get snagged. You're gonna wanna let it sink all the way to the bottom. I mean, that is the most crucial thing. Get your dang worm on the bottom. I've talked about it for years. I'll keep talking about it for years because that is so crucial. And then it is so simple. I mean, I feel like a Geico, a caveman could do it. You reel in your slack, you bring the worm up 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot off the bottom, and then you let it sink. And then you reel in your slack, kind of point your rod tip at the worm in the water, lift it up, let it drop back down. Eventually, you'll feel a bite. We'll talk about hook set here in a second, but it is so stinking simple. And if you're thinking, Tyler, I've tried that, I'm not catching any fish, throw it deeper than you have been and fish it even slower than you have been, and I guarantee you'll start finding success, either with the big worm like I'm throwing, a small worm, any size worm in between. The biggest thing is just to fish it extra slow and let it hop down there on the bottom. Now, like I said, I'm gonna discuss hook set on all of these soft plastic worm retrievals. So when I'm hopping it off the bottom and I feel something different, it could be mushy, it could actually feel like the knock of a fish eating this thing, but for the most part, it's just kind of a soft, mushy feeling that doesn't quite feel like the same retrieval I've been doing, and sometimes you'll even see your line kind of going off to the side as the fish swims away with it. And so what you want to do is let's say you get the bite up here, kind of high up on your retrieve, you don't want to set the hook like this because you have no leverage, you have no power on that fish. So you want to, hopefully the fish holds on to it as they usually do, you want to feel that bite, something's different, reel down. And when I say reel down means reel and point your rod tip down to reel in your slack, and then set the hook up. That way you're using the entire force from bottom to top to set the hook. And on most soft plastics, I would say your hook set should be kind of up and to the side. For years and years, I set the hook, even on my channel, and you can go back and watch old videos, I set the hook to the side, and I still caught fish, but I feel like in terms of getting the most out of your body movement, up into the side is a great way to set the hook on a Texas rig, whether you're on the bank or on the bass boat. So the next soft plastic worm rig I want to talk about is the Carolina rig, and it's similar to a Texas rig in that it actually contains a Texas rig on this side of the combo, but it has a few additions here, and the main goal of a Texas rig is, of course, to be down there on the bottom, but once it's down there on the bottom, it actually wants to keep the soft plastic worm away from the weight itself, and there's several reasons behind that. Let's head on the water and actually rig the Carolina rig. Now, when I first started bass fishing, the only Carolina rigs that I ever saw out there looked something like this. It consisted of a main line, a lead or tungsten weight, a glass bead, sometimes a clacker, a swivel, a certain length of fluorocarbon or monofilament leader material, and finally a hook. The question is though, is all this actually necessary? I don't think so. I think the idea of having all that terminal tackle there to make noise and get a bass's attention is great in theory, but does it actually get you more bites and catch you more fish? I'm not so sure. This is my Carolina rig setup consisting of just 4 main pieces. My main fluorocarbon fishing line, a tungsten weight, a Carolina keeper as we'll talk about here in a second, and a wide gap or straight shank hook. This one here is the VMC Redline. I love this thing. It doesn't require a super strong hook set to penetrate, and of course the hook set is ultra crucial as we'll talk about here in a bit. So step 1 is to thread your line through your weight. Step 2 is to pinch the Carolina keeper open with a pair of pliers and slide it onto your line. Make sure, like I said, that it is actually pinched. That way it does not fray your line on the way up, because it can be a hard plastic edge on the inside. In step 3, in the last step, you tie your hook on. That is the simplest way I've ever seen to make a Carolina rig. But at this point, you're probably wondering, Tyler, what the heck is a Carolina keeper, and why have I never heard of it? Well, to answer the second question, I have no idea, because it took me a long time, really until like 2 or 3 years ago, until I ever heard of these things. But they are a game changer for Carolina rigs. It is a cylindrical piece of plastic with a slit cut through the inside, accomplishing the same task as the traditional swivel, but this time, because you can pinch the hole, you can actually slide that stopper that makes the Carolina rig leader the length it is. You can actually make that fully adjustable on the fly. The same thing could also be achieved by using a bobber stopper instead of a Carolina keeper, but I found the Carolina keeper is a little bit stronger and keeps that weight in place way better than a bobber stopper can. And for any Carolina rig weight over ½ an ounce, I will put a second Carolina rig keeper. I don't think it hurts the action of the bait, of course. I don't think it grabs any more grass. It just makes sure that the weight, when you cast it out there and pull it through cover and structure, cannot slide down the line itself. So as you can probably tell, the Carolina rig is overall a bigger presentation. It's harder to handle, you could say. And because of that, I can't really flip it underneath a boat dock. It's harder to fish around shallow cover. And so because of that, for me, the Carolina rig is purely an open water, deeper style of presentation. So I'm not throwing it around shallow cover. I am just throwing it, making long bombing casts over, offshore rock, offshore brush piles, really anything in deeper water. Usually for me, deeper than 10 feet of water is the only place I'm throwing a Carolina rig, or at least having a lot of success with it. You can downsize the weight and even bring the weight closer to the worm itself, also called a mojo rig, a great way to fish shallow. I just think if we're talking about the overall Carolina rig category, it's meant to fish around deeper water. And if fished patiently in that deeper water, it's gonna lead to some of the biggest bass of your entire life, as long as you can retrieve it right and set the hook right. So let's head on the water and discuss that. This, like I mentioned, can be fished in very similar places to a Texas rig. The few caveats I would say: underneath docks, probably not a good place for a Carolina rig. Maybe under hanging trees or overhanging trees, that's probably not a great place. And especially around like really shallow vegetation and cover, not exactly ideal. But if you're gonna fish in kind of open water, maybe an expansive section of rocks or grass, a Carolina rig definitely can work and is way better, as I'll talk about here in a second, at covering water. It's way more efficient than a Texas rig is. But the number one place I would say a Carolina rig excels, and this really applies to you guys who fish from the kayak or the bass boat, or a John boat, I guess I would say, is that you want to fish an expansive area of rock, whether it's gravel, big chunk rock, slate rock, boulders. Carolina rig excels around rock because as the weight is drug across the bottom, we'll talk about here in a second, the soft plastic is trailing behind weightlessly, and with a Carolina rig, you can make extra long casts, get it to the bottom, and drag it back to the boat a lot more efficiently than you could a Texas rig, specifically a very light one, like I mentioned, I prefer. So when it comes to a Carolina rig, the cast is a little bit different than a Texas rig. You might be able to go kind of overhand cast or even a spinning rod for sure. You can fish a Texas rig on. Carolina rig, for the most part, like I mentioned, my weight is ½ ounce, like 3/8 ounce, and so I don't throw that on a spinning rod. This is purely a bait caster technique for me. And because you have kind of a complex setup right here with the weight that can slide up the line, I like to use a big backwards cast and then heave it forward just like that. There's no whip to it. I'm not going underhand. It's just a big backwards and then launch it up forwards. And that's the best way I have found to not get your Carolina rig tangled in the air. You don't want it kind of helicoptering out there. And you can get good distance out of that as well. Now, this specific area that I'm fishing right now, you just saw me fish the Texas rig in. It is 3.4 feet of water. This is not the best place to throw a Carolina rig, but this is how you do a retrieval. So unlike the Texas rig where you hop it off the bottom, Carolina rig, I'm going to kind of point my rod tip at it, reel in my slack, and drag, just like this. A good 4 to 5 feet Therefore, you've created a whole bunch of slack line. I will then reel it back in, point my rod tip at where the Carolina rig is, and then drag just like this. And sometimes it is a fast drag, and then let it sit for 3 seconds. Fast drag, let it sit. And occasionally, especially in deeper and colder water, let's say you're fishing this thing in the late fall, the winter time, the early spring, you really want to do a slow drag. And it might feel different as far as the bite is concerned than a Texas rig, because you have a weight and then a distance of line, whether it's 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, and then a weightless soft plastic. So sometimes you're going to be dragging and you're like, do I have a bite? Do I not have a bite? The best thing you can do, especially with this technique, is just reel in and keep dragging, because I found fish hang on to a Carolina rig worm a lot longer than almost every other worm we're going to talk about in this entire video. And so you can kind of afford to drag and check, is that a fish? No, is that a fish? Keep dragging. And if it feels weird, especially with a Carolina rig in that, like I talked about, open, expansive rock, hard bottom areas, hook sets are free. And so the hook set with this one is going to be just like the Texas rig, up and to the side, but it is extra crucial to use the most of your reel down and the most of your hook set backwards, because the fish potentially, if the weight is here and the hook is here, he could grab the bait and swim this way. And so if you set the hook 3 foot, that the fish never feels the hook set right there, because all you did was pull the weight. And so you want to have a longer rod, like I talked about, that helps a whole lot. But just the bigger sweeping hook set you can have, I have found helps you land more fish on the Carolina rig. So at this point, the worms we've talked about and the ways to rig them have both been Texas rigged to a certain variety. And the third one, at least the way that I'm going to teach it, still has a Texas rig at its core, but not in the way that it's supposed to be fished. The presentation in the water is much different. This is the drop shot, and the purpose is to have the worm be off the bottom and separated from the weight itself. It is an absolute fish catcher. I have a drop shot tied on 12 months out of the year, and I believe it's one of the most crucial ways to rig a soft plastic worm, no matter where you fish. Let's rig one. Now, like I mentioned, you want your weight to be sitting below your hook, and so that means you have to leave a certain amount of tag end off your line. Usually when you tie your line to a lure, you try to leave as little tag end as possible, and you cut off the tag end. With a drop shot, you don't do that. Let me show you. I've got a long tag end here. It's probably 12 inches, 14 inches, and that's where I'm gonna make my loop to start my Palomar knot. I'm gonna shove that loop, just like I said, tie a regular Palomar knot, whatever knot you want. I choose a Palomar, and make a really short loop. Usually I got a big loop, I'm looping it around my lure. It's just the hook, so all you need is a tiny loop. I'll tie that loop in an overhand knot right here, put the hook through the loop you just made, wet it up, and then tie your knot down, cinch it up, and you have a tied on hook. Now, the next step, and this is crucial, is to take that tag end you have right here, and to make sure that it's not twisted on your line, on the main line from your rod, and you're gonna shove it down through the hole on the top of your hook. Not the bottom. The bottom of the hook is where the bend is. The top, at least on drop shot hooks, is where the point is. So you're gonna shove the line down through and then pull it. In that way, when you kind of straighten out your knot, the hook is sitting perfectly horizontal with the point going up. That way when a fish bites it and you set the hook, it has the point of the hook going into the roof of their mouth. Then you take your tag end and you, at whatever length you want, sometimes it's 2 foot length, sometimes it's 6 inches of length. Whatever you want your drop shot leader to be, you're gonna attach your drop shot hook. Some of them have a little crimp thing right there that you can just pinch your line in, and just like that, you have yourself a fully rigged drop shot. Now, where should you actually fish with a Texas rig drop shot? Because as it is a relatively weedless presentation, you could choose to fish it around shallow cover, but just like the Carolina rig, that's usually not where I'm fishing it. If I'm fishing a pond, I'm making casts, I wouldn't say totally out into the middle of the pond, like perpendicular to the bank. Sometimes they're relatively parallel, but I'm hardly ever working a drop shot in super shallow water. It's still a deeper presentation for me. And because the weight itself tends to get lodged in, especially like snaggy rocks and brush piles and heavy timber, I'm usually throwing it in more open water or just kind of offshore rock in general. Similar places to where I would fish a Carolina rig, but again, it has a totally different action in the water with keeping the bait up in the water column as opposed to dragging behind a weight on the bottom. So it gives the fish a totally different look. And if you are struggling to catch fish in ponds right now, and it is any time from the late spring until the fall, pick up a drop shot, because I guarantee it's gonna bust that skunk. On my channel, we call it the Skunk Buster. So let's head back out on the water to discuss the retrieval and of course, the hook set. And this is really designed to be fished on lighter tackle. I used to always say it needs to be fished on a spinning rod. Nowadays, you have the whole bait finesse system. Some guys love throwing a drop shot on a bait caster. I still prefer the way my wrist feels on a spinning rod, and so I want to fish a drop shot on a spinning rod, not a bait caster, but you can test out what works for you. And this thing is meant to be fished in water, I would say for sure deeper than 6 feet, but don't discount it in shallower water, especially if you have really pressured fish. That means fish that are seeing a lot of lures. They're maybe a little bit smarter than your average bass. Do not discount a drop shot in shallower water. And the only time I really don't throw a drop shot is the spawn, unless I'm actually like visually looking at one, and that fish will not eat the fun stuff like a jig or a swim bait or something bigger, more exciting. I'll pull out the drop shot and actually visually sight fish for that. But the rest of the year, I have this thing in my truck for my 100 ponds and now 200 pond series, as well as my bass boat and kayak almost every time I go fishing. I can't speak highly enough of the drop shot, and if you haven't learned how to do it yet, we're gonna teach you here in a second. I'm gonna cast it out there. Just like every other soft plastic rigging, I'm gonna let it sink down to the bottom. Now, I did click over my spool. Oftentimes in deeper water, I'll have to actually leave this open for a lot longer. I see people out there that cast. As a matter of fact, I'll show you the mistake that I see people make is they cast out there and click it. And right now my line is totally tight from where the bait landed all the way to my rod tip. And what you're doing there is the bait lands, but then you have a tight line, and so the bait actually falls like a pendulum. And if you're fishing in open water and you don't even know, what kind of structure is down there, where the strike zone is, that doesn't really matter a whole lot. But especially if you want to get the longest casting distance and have the bait down there in the strike zone the longest, you want to cast it out there, leave your spool open to make sure it gets all the way to the bottom, then close and start to reel in your slack and retrieve it. Now, I've talked about this in my drop shot masterclass, but let's show you guys exactly how to retrieve a drop shot. So I'm going to reel my rod tip down, almost like I do with a Texas rig, but instead of lifting up 2 to 3 feet and letting it fall, because the bait already has separation from the bottom with the weight here and the bait a good 1.5 to 2 foot above, all I gotta do is get kind of a tight line and just kind of shake the loose slack line that I've created. Now, you don't have to imagine the weight's here and the bait's here, and you're just moving the line enough that the weight stays there on the bottom and the worm moves. You can move the whole package if you want to, but I like to just kind of shake a little bit of that slack line. And man, most of the year, I'm doing a slow shake like this with, if you look at my rod tip, maybe a max of like 6-inch movement as I shake it like this. I mean, it is not much. I'm not shaking it like this. Oftentimes when you do that, your braid will get caught around the rod tip. So that's just not efficient at all. And so I will just kind of shake like this. Then I'll hop it, reel in my slack real quick, and then start shaking again. And oftentimes, just like a Texas rig, you're gonna feel, you know what? I'm shaking and it kind of feels mushy. And then especially with a drop shot on a spinning rod or finesse tactics, you can really kind of pull, because I'm throwing this on a medium light rod. You can pull like this, and oftentimes you'll feel the fish kind of like get it farther back in its crunchers in its mouth, kind of feel that, and then you reel down like this, and then swiftly but strongly lean into those fish. And as long as you have your drag set right, it's not going to automatically slip when you set the hook. I like to have it kind of like that, where I have to kind of exert some pressure. And then as soon as the fish starts fighting, if it's a bigger fish, I will back the drag down and make it a little easier for that fish to pull drag. But like I said, I'll show you again. Cast it out there, let it sink all the way to the bottom. We're in 3.5 feet, so it's already there. I'm going to reel my slack down, start shaking, maybe let it sit in place, shake it again, sit in place, shake it again. Maybe that's what the fish want. Oftentimes you shake it twice and hop. Shake it twice and hop. You really got to figure out what the fish on your body of water want, but the drop shot is a technique for soft plastic worms that every angler doesn't need to just know, they need to master. And so if you haven't yet, let today be the day. Now for our final worm rigging, again, there's more than just these 4, but I feel like these are the 4 most versatile and most used ones. I need to throw in one that I think works really, really well, especially for you guys who fish ponds, your short anglers, and that is the Wacky rig. Now, I include the Neko rig in this category too because they're rigged very similar and they can look similar in the water, although I've got a video coming out here on the channel soon talking about the differences between the Wacky rig and the Neko rig and kind of going into masterclass format on the Neko rig, so stay tuned for that. But the Wacky worm is a simple rig. All it is you take a relatively straight tail worm You take your usually octopus or straight shank style hook, this here being the VMC Redline Wacky weedless hook in a size 1, and I'm just going to thread it right through the middle. That's it. And if you wanted to add a nail weight to the head section of the worm to make it sink a little bit faster, you're kind of getting into Neko rig territory, but both of these are fantastic around shallow water structure pieces like stumps, skipping underneath boat docks, the edge of grass lines, the edge of lily pads, of cattails. That's where a Wacky rig really excels, especially when fish don't want to eat a bigger, more in-your-face style Texas rig is where the Wacky rig can really excel. And for more information on the Wacky and the Neko, especially how to work it and set the hook, let's get back out on the water. So just like any other soft plastic, I mean, I feel like a broken dang record out here. You're gonna cast it out there, let it sink all the way down to the bottom. Now in Neko rig, as opposed to the previous finesse tactic we talked about, the drop shot, the weedless Wacky and weedless Neko can be fished in a lot of the same places a Texas rig can. They're just a more finesse presentation with usually a skinnier worm. So my Neko rig has fallen to the bottom, and unlike a drop shot where I reel my slack down and I start shaking the rod tip, I'm gonna pull it off the bottom and let it sink back down just like the traditional Texas rig. Nothing different. I mean, occasionally I'll lift and then maybe go kind of pop, pop, and let it sink back down. But even underneath boat docks, even underneath overhanging trees, in a deep brush pile on the edge of a grass line, it is just the simplest technique. When I first picked up bass fishing, pretty much the only lure I threw, actually there's 2 lures. There was a chug bug topwater and there was a Wacky rig, and I threw it for years and years, hardly ever had to change because the bass just bit it almost every time I went fishing. I'm not gonna guarantee that for you, but if you do retrieve it like this and rig it in the different ways that I showed you in the studio, I promise you, you're gonna go from getting skunked to at least having some success. And if somebody out there in your family, your friends, has never caught a bass, give them a Wacky rig if you're in shallow water, or a Neko rig in deeper water. Tell them to fish it ultra slow, hopping it off the bottom, and I promise they'll catch some fish. Now let's talk about hook set. Hook set, unlike a Texas rig where you go up and to the side, it's gonna be just like a drop shot. So I'm gonna lift it up, oh, there's a fish, reel down my slack, and swiftly and strongly up like this. If the bait was out here and I felt the bite, I'm gonna lift it up. Again, reel down my slack, point my rod tip, and swiftly and strongly pull up and backwards. And I feel like it goes without saying, but maybe it actually does need to be said. If you are giving the fish slack during the fight, that's when you're gonna lose those fish. So I wish I could show you guys with a fish catch right now, but if I set the hook and then almost like I'm shark fishing or something, I reel down and up and down and up. You're giving that fish a whole lot of slack and you're really not doing any good by it. It's not helping you land that fish. So with all these soft plastics, the best thing you can do is to set the hook and then keep that pressure on the entire time. Sometimes that means it looks relatively boring to fight the fish. You're setting the hook and you're just kind of reeling in like this, but as long as you keep that pressure, almost all of these hooks are going to keep penetration in the fish's mouth, and you're gonna land way more fish on a soft plastic worm. Now, if you enjoyed this video, first of all, I am so glad to have you guys around. If you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. My goal, like I said, is to help you guys catch more and more bass, and soft plastics are a great way to do that. Now, if you wanna take the next step in your bass fishing journey, you gotta learn how to fish jigs, and I've got a jig masterclass video. I taught everything from A to Z, beginner to advanced, when it comes to fishing jigs for bass. I'll leave that video up here in this corner. As I talked about, this video is brought to you by the Tackle Warehouse link. So if you wanna shop for any of this tackle or any of the stuff in the future, if you could shop using the links in the video description, that would greatly help my channel continue to thrive. My name's Tyler, as always, it's a pleasure, and we'll see you guys next time right here on TRF.